My name is Savannah, and I am 21 years old. This is the story of how I spent my graduation day, sitting alone in my car, eating cold fries, and trying not to cry. Everyone says graduation is supposed to be one of the happiest days of your life, and maybe for most people it is, but not for me. While my classmates were hugging their parents and taking endless photos with balloons and flowers, I sat in the farthest corner of the school parking lot. I wasn't hiding, really. I just didn't want to be seen. Through the foggy windshield, I watched the gym doors swing open and families pour out. Mothers dabbing tears, dads beaming with pride, and younger siblings climbing onto the stage for photos. Inside my car, the silence was suffocating. My nursing cap and gown were crumpled on the seat beside me, and the diploma, which I had worked 4 exhausting years for, rested unopened in my lap. I was 21 years old, with the honors of a top graduate, yet I was effectively invisible. Not one member of my family had shown up, despite the invitations I had sent to my mother, my father, and my aunt. The fries were greasy and cold. The parking lot was full of noise, but in here, there was only the sound of my own steady breathing. I wasn't waiting for a miracle anymore. I was just finishing my lunch. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. I finished the last soggy fry and tossed the greasy bag onto the floor mat. The gym was still roaring with applause inside, but to me, it was just white noise. I didn't reach for my phone to see if they had texted, and I didn't check the halfway house for my mother, Patricia, or the country club for my aunt, Cynthia. I already knew the status of our contract. It had been breached a long time ago. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine groaned, a fitting sound for a life I was about to leave in the rearview mirror. My first stop wasn't a celebratory dinner, it was the bank. Anger wasn't loud this time, it was clinical. While my classmates were making reservations at expensive restaurants, I was pulling into a drive-through teller lane. For 4 years, I had been the silent investor in their version of a family. I had worked 3 shifts a night at the fish docks, hauling crates until my fingers were raw, just to keep our shared accounts from going under. My mother had a habit of treating my hard-earned savings like an interest-free loan for her gambling debts. But the term of that loan ended today. I logged into the mobile app with hands that did not shake. I watched the numbers on the screen, $2,500. That was my blood, my sweat, and my nursing degree. With 3 taps, I unlinked the accounts. I moved every cent into a private vault they did not even know existed. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and today I was closing the credit line. Next was Aunt Cynthia's house. I didn't wait for her to return from whatever high society lunch she was using to ignore my graduation. I had 2 suitcases and a few boxes of medical books already packed in the trunk. I entered through the side door, the one I was told to use so I wouldn't track dirt into the real parts of the house. I didn't leave a note, and I didn't leave a mess. I simply stripped the guest room bed and placed the key on the bare mattress. I had stopped making their morning coffee weeks ago, but today I was removing my entire presence from their inventory. I drove to a small storage unit I had rented near the city docks. As I clicked the heavy padlock into place, at 12:03 p.m., I felt a strange surge of power. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a balance sheet. They weren't going to be shocked by what they had done, they were going to be shocked that I had stopped playing along. Inside my head, a different kind of sunrise was glowing, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. I had been a burden in their eyes for 21 years, so I decided to become a ghost instead. A ghost with a plan, and a very specific set of receipts. I sat in the stillness of the storage unit for a moment, the heavy scent of cold metal and dust settling around me. I wasn't being cruel, and I wasn't having a tantrum. I was simply correcting a 4-year accounting error. To understand why I was unlinking our lives so coldly, You have to understand the debt I had already paid in full. Last year, my mother, Patricia, found the envelope hidden in my mattress. It contained $2,500, every cent I had saved for my final semester of nursing school. She didn't use it for food or rent. She took it to a basement card game to pay off a debt to a man she barely knew. When I confronted her, she didn't apologize. She told me I was selfish for wanting to play nurse while she was drowning. To cover the gap, I took every extra shift at the fish docks. I spent 6 months hauling crates of ice and scales from 4 in the morning until my classes started at 8. The smell of salt and decay never really leaves your skin when you work those hours. My Aunt Cynthia would watch me walk through the door, exhausted and shivering, and sneer at me. She called me a costly existence, a drain on the family resources, even though my dock wages were the only reason the lights stayed on in her house. I realized then that my family didn't hate me because I was a burden. They hated me because I was a mirror. In toxic families, there is a pattern known as scapegoating dynamics. Every failing system needs a trash can, someone to dump their own insecurities and failures into, so they don't have to look at themselves. Patricia was an addict, and Cynthia was a social climber who had failed at every venture she ever started. By branding me as the unworthy one, they could pretend they were the saints for keeping me around. It gave them a sense of moral superiority that they hadn't earned. People often ask why victims of this kind of treatment stay so long. Why did I keep paying? Why did I keep showing up for dinners where I was the punchline? It is because of the survivor's invisible chain. It is a psychological prison without iron bars. When you are told you are a burden from the age of 6, you don't fight for freedom because you've been conditioned to believe you don't deserve it. You stay because the chain is the only thing connecting you to a sense of home, even if that home is a fire. I wasn't being weak for those 4 years. I was surviving. I was quiet because I was building my armor in secret, waiting for the moment it was thick enough to withstand the exit. That moment was now. I looked at the bank confirmation on my phone one last time. The $2,500 was safe. My nursing license was in my bag. I was no longer an investment for them to liquidate. The ledger was balanced, and for the first time in 21 years, the Henderson family was in the red. I wasn't the trash can anymore. I was the one taking out the trash. I sat in the heavy silence of my car, the interior still smelling faintly of the cold fries I had finished minutes ago. My phone vibrated harshly against the hard plastic of the dashboard, the light cutting through the dimness of the parking garage. The screen flashed with a notification from my Aunt Cynthia. It was exactly 12:45 p.m. The message was not an apology for missing my graduation ceremony or an explanation for their absence. It was a clinical list of domestic demands. Savannah, where are you? I expect you home by 4 to prep the roast for dinner. Your mother and I have guests coming over to celebrate the start of the week, and the guest bathroom needs to be spotless. The arrogance was staggering. To Cynthia, my 21 years of life were merely a long-term service agreement that she assumed had no expiration date. She did not want to know if I had found a place to sleep or if I was okay. She only wanted her chores completed. I watched the 3 dots on the screen appear and disappear as she typed another. Your mother says you are ignoring her calls. Stop being so dramatic and answer us immediately. Almost on cue, the phone began to ring. The caller ID displayed my mother's name, Patricia. I let it ring until the very last second. Then I pressed accept. I did not speak. I simply waited, treating the call as a data collection exercise rather than a conversation. Savannah, finally, Patricia said. Her voice was high-pitched and edged with a familiar, frantic greed. There was no mention of my nursing degree or the fact that I had graduated at the top of my class. I heard you are the director's favorite student. That man, Jeffrey, he is extremely wealthy, is he not? I need you to go to his office tomorrow. Tell him I had a medical emergency. Tell him you need a $3,000 advance on your future salary to help me. I need to clear my debts with your father, Gregory, before he sees the bank statements. I looked at the unopened diploma sitting in the passenger seat beside me. My success was not a milestone to them. It was simply a fresh asset they could attempt to leverage for their own gain. Patricia was not asking for help. She was assigning a task to her cash cow. She viewed my professional reputation and my connection to Director Jeffrey as collateral for her own gambling failures. "I am not doing that, Mom," I said. My voice was cold and clinical, a sharp contrast to her rising hysterics. "What? Why are you being so difficult? After everything I did to raise you, I did not wait for the rest of the script." I ended the call. For years, I had been the silent investor in their version of a family, footing the bill for their choices while being treated as a burden. I did not cry, and I did not panic. Anger was not a loud emotion anymore. It was an accounting process. Now, I realized that our relationship had been a subscription service, and I was finally hitting the unsubscribe button. I went back to my laptop and focused on the glow of the screen. I was moving from emotional reactions to systematic, professional retaliation. They were not just toxic family members. They were bad debt that needed to be written off. In my new life, the ledger was finally going to be balanced. Just as the silence in the car began to feel permanent, a steady knock sounded on the glass. I did not flinch. I did not expect the police or a debt collector. I looked up to see Director Jeffrey standing there. He was not in a sharp suit or behind his mahogany desk. He looked like a man who had been searching for someone he actually cared about. I rolled down the window halfway. He did not wait for an invitation. He walked around and sat in the passenger seat like he had done it 100 times before. Jeffrey adjusted his position, his robes bunching up awkwardly in the cramped space of my old sedan. He held a thick manila folder in his lap. I stared at the steering wheel, waiting for the lecture about missing the reception, but he did not mention the cake or the small talk. He looked out at the empty rows of the garage and told me he noticed I did not stay. He said he understood, because he had skipped his own graduation years ago, when his parents were in the middle of a divorce. Believing someone like me did not belong was a lie he had also told himself. I told him it was not a big deal, and that lots of people had it worse. He just shook his head, looking at me with a gaze that was not judgmental, but knowing. He told me he had seen my transcripts and knew how hard I had worked to be here. He knew about the night shifts at the fish docks, the salt on my skin, and the exhaustion in my eyes. I felt a lump in my throat, but I forced it down. This was not a tragedy, it was a transition. Then he said something that stopped my heart. He mentioned the groceries. For 2 years, someone had been leaving bags of food and supplies on my doorstep, twice a month. I had convinced myself it was a clerical error from a local charity. Jeffrey looked at me and said he knew the contents of those bags because he was the one who bought them. He lived 3 doors down from my Aunt Cynthia's house. He had watched me haul crates until my hands bled and then walk into a house that did not want me. He opened the folder and began naming names. He spoke about the people who had been quietly showing up for me all along. People like Dr. Aris, who stayed late to help me with clinical rotations, and Nurse Miller, who let me use the hospital showers when my water was shut off. They were my chosen family. He told me I was not as invisible as I thought. I just did not have the kind of support that shows up in photo albums. I watched the dust motes dance in the dim light of the garage. Jeffrey continued to list the people who had formed an invisible safety net around me. He mentioned the head of the lab, who had quietly adjusted my hours so I could sleep, and the security guard who protected my car during the summer heat. These were the quiet cares stitched through my daily life. Support, he told me, comes from the people who show up. Blood does not guarantee it. Love does. I swallowed hard, looking at the unopened diploma. I had not done this alone. I carried the weight, yes, but others had helped me lift it piece by piece. His words were not dramatic, but they hit harder than any applause I could have gotten in that gym. I had been so consumed by the people who left that I had completely overlooked the ones who chose to stay. Jeffrey reached into the folder and pulled out more than just words. He pulled out the proof of a legacy that my mother, Patricia, had tried to steal before I even knew it was mine. I reached out and took the first sheet of paper from the folder. It was an official letter from the State Board of Nursing Education, dated 14 months ago. My name was at the top, printed in a bold, clinical font. Below it was a confirmation of a $5,000 scholarship for academic excellence and financial hardship. My eyes traveled to the bottom of the page, searching for the signature. There it was. My name, written in a looping, delicate script that I had never used in my life. It was a perfect imitation of a girl who did not yet know how to protect herself. Director Jeffrey pointed to the timestamp of the withdrawal. The funds had been moved to a third-party account, exactly 48 hours after the award was issued. I did not need a detective to tell me where that money went. I remembered that week clearly. It was the same week my Aunt Cynthia bought the new leather sofa she would not let me sit on. It was the same week my mother, Patricia, suddenly had enough cash to disappear to the city for 3 days while I ate instant noodles in the dark because the power had been cut. I sat back against the seat, the paper crinkling in my grip. For years, I had been the silent investor in their version of a family, but this was a different kind of transaction. This was not just a missed graduation or a stolen dinner. This was a felony. They had not just overdrafted my emotions, they had committed fraud against my future. They had looked at a grieving teenager who was working 3 jobs and decided she was an asset to be liquidated. A short flashback flickered in my mind. I was standing in the kitchen, exhausted from a night shift at the docks, asking Patricia if she had seen the mail regarding the grant. She had not even looked up from her drink. She told me I was being delusional, and that the world did not owe me a free ride just because I was poor. She told me to get back to work and stop dreaming. I had believed her, because the survivor's invisible chain was still wrapped tight around my throat. I thought my lack of resources was a personal failing, not a calculated theft. Director Jeffrey reached into the folder again and pulled out a small, heavy business card. The gold lettering caught the dim light of the parking garage. "This is Marcus," he said. "He is an attorney who specializes in white-collar crime and fiduciary breach. I have already sent him the preliminary documentation and the original signature cards from your school files. He is waiting for your call." I took the card, feeling its sharp edges against my thumb. My signature had been mine, but the hand that held the pen was not. Patricia had always been good with a pen. She used to sign my father Gregory's checks before he realized she was draining him dry. She had applied the same skill to me. She had not seen a daughter. She had seen a $5,000 opportunity. Anger was not a fire anymore. It was a blade, cold and honed to a lethal point. The relationship I had with my family was not a bond. It was a bad debt, and I was finally calling in the collectors. This was not revenge. It was a forensic audit of 21 years of abuse. I did not need an apology from Patricia or Cynthia. I needed a court order. I looked at Director Jeffrey and gave him a short, sharp nod. The accounting was over. Now it was time for the reckoning. I pulled up to Aunt Cynthia's house at exactly 6:45 p.m. The house was glowing with light, and the sound of forced laughter drifted through the open windows. I didn't use the front door. I used the side entrance, the one designated for the costly existence they had tolerated for 21 years. I walked straight into the dining room, my heels clicking a steady, clinical rhythm against the hardwood floor. Patricia was there, holding a glass of wine that smelled of my forged scholarship money. Cynthia was laughing at a guest's joke, sitting on the leather sofa I was never allowed to touch. They both froze when they saw me. "Savannah, what are you doing here? I told you the roast needed to be in by 4, Cynthia snapped, her voice automatically resetting to its default tone of disappointment. I did not answer, and I did not apologize. I simply walked to the head of the table and placed the thick envelope from Marcus next to her plate. "This is not an apology, and it is not a chore list," I said. My voice was calm, factual, and lethal. Patricia reached for the envelope with trembling fingers, her eyes darting to mine. "Is this more money? Jeffrey gave you the advance?" I watched her open it. I watched the color drain from her face as she read the words felony forgery and fiduciary breach. The guests went silent, realizing this was not a family drama, but a crime scene in the making. Cynthia grabbed the paper from her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. This is a mistake. You would not do this to your own family, Savannah. Think about our reputation. I am thinking about it, I replied. I am thinking about the $5,000 you stole and the 21 years of interest you owe on my soul. This is not a discussion, it is a foreclosure. Patricia started to sob, the same performative tears she used to manipulate my father, Gregory. She tried to grab my hand, babbling about the invisible chain of motherhood. I pulled back. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for the last time. I looked down at my watch. It was 6:57 p.m. The police have the original signature cards and the bank records, I said. They will be here in 3 minutes. I suggest you use that time to decide which of you is going to take the blame. Cynthia tried to scream, but the sound died in her throat when I reached out and picked up the spare key, sitting in the porcelain bowl on the sideboard. I will not be needing this, I said, dropping it into my bag, and you will not be needing me to prepare any more dinners. They were not my family. They were a bad investment I was finally writing off. I turned and walked out the door, the sound of my mother's wailing fading behind me. As I stepped onto the porch, the first blue and red lights appeared at the end of the block. I did not look back, and I did not feel guilt. I just felt balanced. I walked into the Harbor Grill at exactly 8:00 p.m. The air smelled of salt and genuine welcome, a stark contrast to the sterile silence of my car. Director Jeffrey was already there, standing at the head of a long table filled with my chosen family, the doctors, the nurses, and the quiet observers who had supported me piece by piece. He raised his glass to the top graduate of the year, and for the first time in 21 years, the laughter around me didn't feel like a transaction. I opened my phone, scrolled to the names Patricia and Cynthia, and hit delete. The ledger was clear. The bad debt was finally gone. To you listening, if you have ever felt invisible, forgotten, or unworthy, please hear me. You are not defined by the people who left, but by your own quiet resilience. You are not a burden, you are a survivor. You are not alone, and somewhere, someone is rooting for you in ways you cannot yet see. When they knock on your window, let them in. We all deserve to feel seen, even if it is just for one night. If this story meant something to you, please share it so others on the edge know they have a place at the table. Like and subscribe to support justice.